This video is sponsored by Delete Me. Flying in America. The fastest, most convenient way of long-distance travel. Punctual, convenient, quality, prestigious. Wait, I'm sorry, I mean constantly late, inconvenient, low quality, and about as prestigious as a highway gas station. Tens of thousands of delayed flights each year, missed connections, wasted time, ever-increasing junk fees, ever-shrinking overhead bins and legroom. There is something clearly wrong with the American airline industry. There is a shortage of pilots, flight attendants, and all kinds of other airline employees. Those in the industry are overworked and exhausted, having to deal with frustrated and angry passengers after waves of flight cancellations. Meanwhile, service to mid-sized cities is constantly being reduced, citing low profitability. These are the obvious signs of a broken airline industry. But in this case, the frustration for the passenger is a crisis for the country. Worst of all, American taxpayers have to keep bailing out this disaster show like during 9/11 or the COVID pandemic. They have no choice. If the airline industry collapses, the economy would soon follow. So in a bizarre twist of fate, US airlines are simultaneously failing and are too big to fail, turning them into bottomless pits Americans have to keep shoveling money into. In other words, flying sucks and taxpayers are paying for it. However, what people may not realize is that this ongoing disaster show can be all traced back to a single decision made about half a century ago. So in order to have a shot at fixing this mess, first let's take a look at how we got here. From the 1910s and on, during the early years of the US airline industry, the US government helped upstart companies with subsidies. Establishing a safe, reliable, stable service across the country was an obvious national interest. This subsidy program was a success. Until it wasn't. Once airlines established themselves, cutthroat market competition began, turning the brand new industry into a battlefield. In order to rein in companies and bring order to the skies and airports, Congress stepped in and passed the Civil Aeronautics Act of 1938. This gave rise to the Civil Aeronautics Board, or CAB, an organization set to regulate entry into the industry and to enforce certain price controls, keeping airfares fair and reasonable. The CAB also prevented airlines from using their power and leverage in sectors other than aviation. The goal was to artificially calm the market to avoid bankruptcies, thus taxpayer-funded bailouts, something that has become normalized today. They also work to prevent market predation, smaller players getting muscled out, and airports being dominated by a single large company, among other goals. These efforts resulted in a regulated oligopoly with a small number of highly regulated big players, which were forced to provide reliable, high-quality service across the country. And they did. When people think of the golden age of US aviation, this is the era they have in mind, and it was brought about by regulation. But then, disaster struck. In the 1970s, manufacturers began delivering high-capacity, wide-body airplanes. This resulted in overcapacity or more empty planes. In addition, between 1969 and 1978, jet fuel prices more than tripled on top of the oil shock of 1973. The CAB did respond by raising prices and cutting excess capacity, but it was too late. The system of regulations came under pressure from both political sides. They passed the Airline Deregulation Act in 1978, abolishing price caps, dissolving the CAB, and lifting a ton of regulations. Airlines could suddenly fly where they wanted and charge what the market would allow. The airline industry became a sort of capitalistic Wild West, much like how the internet is nowadays with people's personal data. Some people out there make a living by scraping your personal data from wherever they can. Then data brokers sell it off to companies looking to fine-tune their algorithms and the like. This leaves you vulnerable to becoming a target of identity theft or harassment. The safest choice here is to keep your digital footprint under your control by removing superfluous data about you. And you can do just that with Delete Me, the sponsor of today's video. Delete Me helps remove your personal data by scanning hundreds of data broker websites that collect online personal data, including yours. Experts at Delete Me will then request its removal, helping you reduce your digital footprint. After a week, you'll be getting a privacy report detailing what sort of data was found and was consequently removed. Delete Me will rescan those websites later to make sure your data doesn't surface somewhere else. Do not let your personal data fall into the wrong hands. Get 20% off Delete Me consumer plans by going to joindeleteme.com/adam20 and use the promo code adam20 during checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/adam20, promo code adam20. Thank you for checking out Delete Me. The idea behind deregulation was that big government stifles innovation and progress, and once the market is set free, the airline industry will just sort things out on its own, just like how a libertarian changes a light bulb. They let the free market take care of it. Some free market advocates even claimed that following deregulation, there could be up to 200 airlines operating in the US with perfect free market efficiency. And everything turned out exactly as they said it would. By that I mean the industry quickly devolved into a complete shit show. For the first few years, free market advocates seemed correct. Lots of new entrants joined the market. In the early 1980s, the fare wars broke out, and by 1985, the market share of the 10 largest airlines dropped from 87% to 75%. It was a major win for the free market crowd, until airlines inevitably started consolidating. Between 1985 and 1990, more than 200 carriers either merged with others or went bankrupt. By the end of the decade, the 9 largest airlines controlled about 92% of the market, a rate higher than before deregulation. Incentives flipped completely. Under regulations, airlines could only compete on quality as pricing was out of their control. A virtuous race to the top. With deregulation, they could charge whatever they could get away with. Therefore, they started competing on price instead. Thus began a race to the bottom. Rock bottom. Meal portions became smaller and lower quality. 6-hour flight? Here, have a bag of peanuts. Customer support takes ages to reach. Lines at check-in desks? Like the entry at a Taylor Swift concert. In addition to the dozen junk fees slapped on top of your flight ticket enabled by the lack of regulations. Those wide, cushioned seats with sufficient legroom in a pleasant interior? That is not how you turn a profit, my friend. Narrow, uncomfortable seats with no legroom is what makes the line go up. Passengers packed tighter than sardines might be bad for you, but it's great for the company bottom line. Why provide a high-quality service when we can just shovel passengers into the aviation equivalent of a kettle wagon while slapping 10 different fees on them for good measure? In fact, why not sell more tickets than there are seats? Statistically, some idiots will miss their flights anyway, and each unfilled seat makes the line go up less. If everyone turns up, the passengers can just draw straws and get bumped to a different flight in exchange for some gift cards or flight credits or something. Or sometimes they get dragged off the plane screaming. But wait, there's more! Through the sheer innovative power of the free market, the aviation industry is ready to present its latest innovation. You know, business class, economy class, and first class? Well, get ready for fart class. This is what you deserve according to corporate. But hey, for just $19.99, we will make sure that the person whose ass is aimed at your face will not get served any beans. Or for just $13.99, you'll be permitted to use the drop-down oxygen mask even outside an emergency. Meanwhile, rest assured, the people who came up with this are all flying first class, so they won't be subjected to this brilliant free market innovation for a single second. In fact, they might just switch to flying private jets for their own safety, because airlines have found that they can save a ton of money via deferred aircraft maintenance. Deregulation further led to the formation of fortress hubs, where one airline essentially took over an entire airport. The drawbacks of this approach become apparent during extreme weather events or cyber attacks. Entire regions deemed too unprofitable were simply dropped from the schedule. If airlines can't make money off you, sorry, no flights for you. But deregulation also meant a decrease in labor rights. Low wages, overworked employees, and bad workplace conditions led to strikes in the 1980s. But since problems weren't resolved back then, today we have a chronic shortage of all sorts of workers. And, best of all, with deregulation, airlines became subject to market boom and bust cycles. Meaning, every time a crisis happens, bankrupt airlines need to be bailed out by taxpayers. But, at the end of it all, the horrible service, the overbookings, the constant shortages, delays and cancellations, the bad food, the horrible seats, fart class, after all those, at least flying is cheaper, right? Well, if a 100-mile flight between two cities cost $100 before deregulation, today that flight would cost around $75. But you're also routed through a fortress hub in the name of efficiency, adding a transfer to your trip and ballooning your trip to 200 miles. So even though the cost per mile is lower, you're now paying $150 for the same trip, plus $50 more for junk fees. Now that's what I call free market innovation. But why did deregulation fail? It's not a complicated question. Free market capitalism devolving into cartels, trusts and monopolies is something you learn in elementary school, at least in Europe. But to pinpoint some important problems, point number 1, 200 plus carriers simply cannot operate in the US. There aren't enough airports, gates or passengers to accommodate that many. In addition, larger legacy airlines can use predatory pricing or strategies such as frequent flyer programs to siphon away passengers from smaller players. Point number 2 is especially important. Think of a popular US flight route where a large legacy airline is providing service. A new, small smaller player comes along, which, through innovation and competent management, starts providing a better service for the same ticket price. The legacy airline can then leverage its size to artificially lower its ticket prices, thereby siphoning away the smaller player's revenue. This is an expensive game, with both airlines going deep into the red. However, the larger airline has a bigger reserve and other profitable routes that can cover the expense. Chances are the smaller airline isn't so resilient and will be forced to go out of business, or at least to give up on that flight route. Once it's gone, the legacy airline is free to jack prices back up to their original levels, sometimes even beyond that. So, how do we solve this mess? How could we fix the broken US aviation sector? There are 4 major ideas at play. Number 1 is re-regulation. This could provide a quick fix to the most glaring issues, but wouldn't touch the deeper, structural problems with the industry. In addition, larger, powerful companies could outmaneuver regulators, leading to an unintended national whack-a-mole competition. Number 2 would be a public option alongside private airlines. This public airline could provide reliable, baseline services for passengers even in places not served by private carriers. However, this would likely lead to private airlines focusing even more on the most profitable routes, leaving smaller, less profitable routes without service. The third option is a regulated monopoly in the form of route concessions. In this example, the government awards contracts to private carriers to operate a given route based on competition. The company offering the best terms gains the right to operate the route for a predetermined amount of time, having to abide by strict rules in terms of quality, frequency, and so on. This is how the European Union is starting to operate its rail network, and so far it seems to function well enough. The downside is that in the event of contract non-compliance, fixing problems or finding a new operator takes time. Shout out to RegioJet and the half-a-century-old used German scrap metal, which they call their rolling stock, with grime on the seats dating back to the height of the Cold War. The fourth, final option is nationalization. Transportation is a public service and a strategically important sector for the country. Why give it over to profit-oriented corporations then? A single, unified airline would be easier to oversee, especially since it would be publicly controlled, as it would not operate under the profit motive, it wouldn't manipulate prices or hit you with 10 different convenience fees to increase profit just to make shareholders happy. In this case, the people would be the shareholders through the government. All you need is strict and consequent quality controls and things should end up fine. Whatever solution the US decides to go with, one thing is certain: things cannot go on like this any longer. So the choice is clear. Either Americans fix their airline industry, or they will get to enjoy the fart-sniffing cabin for the rest of their lives.